Okay, there we are. Welcome, Darin Stevenson, to the listening.
Thank you, Timothy.
Great
Nice
to
to.
have you on. Um, we'll start just by telling us where you are in the world.
I'm in San Francisco, California, on the West Coast of the United States. Pretty relatively liberal city, metropolis, one of the big international cities.
What's the weather like there? I'm British, so the weather's very important.
Well, the weather's important to me too. These days, it's we're in the first half of this lunar cycle. We're going to have the full moon tonight. And in this cycle, there have been really surprisingly powerful winds. So the past week has been very windy and a little bit of rain. Often when those two things come together around here, trees come down.
Okay. And what's your prevailing wind there? Is it coming off the Pacific or, which
Um,
direction are the strong winds usually?
I think the strong winds were listed as north-northeast,
Okay.
which I believe means they're coming from that direction.
Yeah. Because, I don't know how it is, obviously, West Coast where you are, but in England and Britain as a whole, most of our weather tends to come up from the southwest with the Gulf
Mm,
Stream. So
mm,
our what we call the prevailing winds, which are usually the most frequent winds, are from west, southwest. But
mm.
we do get, all around the compass, especially in the winter. Um,
We also get a lot of wind from the west because that way is the ocean.
yeah,
That's west here.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so in the evening, often there's some wind, but this was a really significant event. It sort of woke me up
Mm,
and I went outside and felt, the sort of the spirit of the wind.
mm.
And it was something very profound. I'm not sure I can put it in language, but it was as if things were just being swept, very forcefully swept away.
Well, that's a nice thought. Yeah, the wind, something I've noticed has become really, really noticeable in, say, the last 15 years is how much more weather we're getting and how much more wind. That's probably the biggest indicator to me of something going on major with the climate is that we've just had so much more wind than I ever remember in my life. So yeah, and the wind. There's something about the wind because it's such a kind of emotional kind of weather to me, and it does stir things up. It changes things. It ruffles you. And we have these really particular winds with very strong personalities. So the westerlies and the southwesterlies, they're quite gusty and blousy and billowing. And then we get this easterly wind here in Norfolk, because I'm on the east side of Britain, of England. We get this easterly wind, especially in the winter, which is like somebody's just switched it on and it just goes and it fucking drills at your head. And
Hmm.
sometimes we get locked into it like for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and it's freezing cold because it's coming across the sea. It's coming from mainland Europe and Siberia beyond it. And, in the winter, it can be really, really cold.
Hmm.
Um, they call it locally here, they call it a lazy wind because it doesn't go round you, it goes straight through you. Yeah. And of
That's
course,
an
the other one is when we get it from the north here, because we're on the little sort of sticking out bit on the east side of England. There's nothing between our north coast here and the Arctic. So
hmm.
when it comes from there, it's coming all the way down. So yeah, yeah, I quite like the wind. There's a lot of yeah, there's just a lot of poetry in it, and
It's certainly true that over the past, say, 10 years, the weather has changed very dramatically here from the previous 20. right? Which is all I know of. There's been much more diversity in the weather. It gets colder in the winter than it used to, and it gets much hotter than it used to in my neighborhood. Commonly in my hood, over here we use Fahrenheit. 67 is a very warm day, and you might get 2 or 3 of them in a year. Now we have days that are 80 or 90, and you can have 30 or 40 of them in a year.
Right, right.
So it's a lot different.
Yeah, it's got hot.
You know, other people have said something similar, but I think, in my view, climate change is almost the privileged institutional narrative about the environment, in the sense that, yes, of course, the climate is responding to human activity. But what's actually going on is that we're ripping the foundations out of the environment. And so to call that climate change, it's sort of like, it's some kind of deflection thing, right? Mm-hmm. We're worried because maybe the oceans will rise and we'll lose some land and some cities will be submerged. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to me there are any sort of cultural organs or institutions that are situated to actually pay clear attention to the fact that we're just obliterating the anciently conserved environments, which of course are our origins, moment to moment, not just historically.
Yeah. No.
So I'm always a little worried that there's a bit of a red herring there. Everybody's looking at the climate, but what's really going on is we've poisoned every aspect that we can possibly, destroy and get away with so far. And though I'm not a pessimist per se, I'm not terribly hopeful that the supercultures will change direction, even if they start to feel the force of the repercussions of our activity.
Yeah, the language is so important, and you're absolutely right. It sounds quite benign, climate change. It's like, oh, it's a little bit warmer today.
Yeah.
As you say, obviously there are massive global cycles of climate change that go on all the time.
Obviously.
But clearly the ransacking of the environment that has happened increasingly, like exponentially it seems, in our lifetimes.
Yeah, geometric progression.
Is having a profound effect on what's going on. It's an interesting kind of thing to get into in terms of the human responsibility, because I sort of see it both ways. I feel like, we're responsible, but also it's the planet doing humans that's doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There's a kind of, I've got this whole fascination with all these different life forms that exist right now, and some of them are corporations, some of them are cities, and they're like living things. When I look at them, when I look at a city, I think, well, that's just a kind of living thing that, like a human has communities of bacteria, a city has communities of people, and it kind of uses them to live. And there are layers and layers to this, and you could see a corporation as just some kind of strange living thing that uses resources, that ransacks the environment, that ransacks the minds and bodies, and feeds off the substrate of humans, and they're really kind of, depending on the way you look at it, they sort of seem like living things to me. And I wonder, if they're not just other forms of life, because they're there, are they? And maybe it's a kind of arrogance of humans to think that we created these things. We were involved for sure, but we don't seem to be controlling them or directing them really, actually. Do you know what I mean?
So this is a topic that's particularly interesting to me, and I think rich with potential for insight. And of course, I have some pet ideas and biases. I'm not religious about them. I'm happy to look at other perspectives, or even have the ones I like shot down. But this idea that you're speaking of, it kind of troubled me for a really long time. And it began with a more or less philosophical question that I think arose for me meaningfully for the first time in my 20s. What is natural?
Mm.
Because, again, the language is very tricky. And unless we're attentive, it will just drag us into little sort of low-hanging, conceptions of things. When I hear you speak of a city as an organism or a living thing, by the way, that's a weird idea by itself, because there are no living things, there are only living beings. Right? There are no objects which are alive that I'm aware of. At least we don't ordinarily associate that property with objects. But one problem that I have with the idea of, say, a city as a living thing, and I'll present a little toy of something similar as soon as I'm done saying this. Humans are capable of creating something that is like the opposite of life. And that's not merely death. That's something voracious, endlessly hungry, eats everything. There are no life forms like that. That's not alive. And we can say, well, it has some properties that we recognize from organisms and ecologies. Yes. But organisms and ecologies don't tend to wipe out their own basis. And to keep a city alive for one day, a city like the one I live in, it's unimaginable the harm that has to be done both here, but primarily far away, right? Just to keep this sort of half machine filled with people pulsing at its usual rate. And it was fascinating to see that rate slow down for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
During the pandemic. Yeah.
Mm.
I personally I'd like to use a different word, because nobody came and locked me into my apartment. And lockdown is a media term that I think has been stolen from prisons. That's something that happens in prisons, right? And nobody that I know, I'm not saying no one has, but no one I know has been locked down, right? We've had stay-at-home orders and things like this.
What about mentally, emotionally? Because I see that. Maybe it's more
different story, but I'd probably still pick slightly different language, right? Okay. Constrained, constricted. But I want to go back to the cities thing for a moment.
Sure.
So it occurred to me that humans are an animal that's capable of doing something, and they have a particular problem with this en masse, right? At large layers of social organization, we have this weird thing going on. And it's almost as if, or one might think of it this way, something's riding us, right? It's like our technologies that we invented to give us convenience and protection, they have a cost. And something else has to pay that cost. We like to offload it into the environment or the poor, the voiceless, and so on. And at the level of the supercultures, the stuff that's riding us is malignant. It's mostly really things you'd never invent or sign up for if they weren't already there, But there's something really peculiar about city blocks. If I'm fascinated by biology, not a pro, I don't have a degree, but I've been an amateur biologist my entire life, and I'm particularly fascinated by cellular biology. And the weird thing about a city block is, from one perspective, if you look at it, you'll see, if you look out my window, for example, you'll see the roads, right? And then you'll see all the cars, right? cars surround the city block. And they're a bit like viruses of enormous size. In fact, they use the humans to reproduce them and to maintain them and all this kind of thing, right? And then you'll have the sidewalk, right? That's the little spot where the humans have space to travel. But most of it belongs to the machines, the roads. And things that go in the roads get killed. That's a dead place for life. You'll die there. So then there's the homes, and the homes are little sort of replicas of even a community or something, but behind the homes. So there's like the roads, the sidewalks, the garages and homes, and then behind the homes, encircled by the block, there's this little spaces of life, right? And it's almost like the outside is the membrane of a cell, and it's protecting those tiny remnants of highly controlled life that it holds at its heart, you know, in the center of the city block. And I find the analogy surprising and entertaining in some way. I don't necessarily believe it, but it's an interesting toy. Wonder what you think.
Yeah, well, what comes up straight away as you talk about this malignant force that's riding us is, and it kind of fits in with this whole development with the internet, which is this incredibly kind of brain-like thing that's appeared very recently, and all these neural connections, and the emergence of AI, and you know these ever expanding, ever kind of sort of growing in complexity and sophistication, these AIs that seem to have appeared as well, and all of that together to me almost looks like there's some kind of life, okay, because we've defined life as something that beings have rather than things which are lifeless, but it feels like something lifeless, at least in biological terms, is pulling like from the future through us this whole thing in being. And it's like the cities and the corporations and the internet are like the first, it's almost like a higher order maybe of life that to us doesn't look like life because it's not biologically based, even though it uses biology as a substrate. It's like it's growing on top of that and using it, and it's totally malignant because it's just consuming, and it's so expensive to produce that it takes a whole living biological planet to kind of grow it into its life, you know, in its terms, you know, and its version of life may be machine life, it may be machine intelligence, it may be, you know, cold hard matter with electricity and some kind of thought running through it. It's inconceivable. I mean, maybe we're, you know, just like we can only see the visible light spectrum, maybe there's a kind of awareness spectrum that dimensionally or something that beyond the human kind of band that this thing is in, that's pulling this stuff forwards in the future. I don't know, I'm kind of jamming a bit, but you know what I mean? Because that's what came up when you were talking like that. I just immediately thought, ooh, maybe it is. It's like the, you know, Terence McKenna has that idea of the, what is it, the eschaton, this thing, this kind of singularity in the future that's kind of pulling everything towards it. Yeah, I don't know. I could just seeing what's going on with this exponential takeoff with the technology and how it is using up the planet, the living planet, and us so rapidly.
Of course, it is us. We are doing it, right? And it's not necessarily you and I who are so much doing it. Again, there's a problem at the layer of the supercultures and collectivity, right? Or at least that's where the problem becomes most severely expressed and ramified, whatever the problem may actually be. But one of the things that I notice that troubles me very deeply is in the cognitive development of our species over time, right, in the long timeline of the evolution of the kinds of minds that we have today. And this is a topic that fascinates me. There appears to be some point, I don't know exactly how long ago, but let's say for kicks 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, where something goes haywire in human cognition in general. And we begin to transform toward more localized self-like mind. And somewhere back in this problem, the fact that we could represent things, we could make representations of things, became a real issue for us. And indigenous peoples were often aware of this, and there's evidence of it in nearly all of the books that we associate with religion. There will be, for example, the admonition against the formation of images, right? Something that no one would take very, you wouldn't take this
God, or naming God, or kind of using a word. Yeah, okay.
Bingo. So for me, one of the avenues, the perspective that I find very useful is to watch the history, to look carefully into the history of how representational thought arose in human beings, and then how it became more formalized, and then how it began to become mechanical. And somehow within that lane is, I think, the origin of most of our problems and perhaps some of the medicine we need. If we can understand the phase steps in that history better together, then we can understand how it is that our collectives can be so misguided and so incredibly purposeful, right? Because they absolutely succeed at what they're doing. Unfortunately, what they're doing will end the possibility of success for anything, but they're really good at continuing on in this direction. And one of the things that humans have long done is mimicked organisms in their technologies. If you look, for example, at how two modems negotiate a connection, or even how you connect to a website where you provide credentials and so on and so forth. What you see there is a paradigm that's everywhere in nature, but humans pay no attention to it in nature. In communication with each other, they attend it, but not consciously. Right? So if, for example, I ask you, would you like to go for a walk? And you say, sure. I will know that you don't mean yes. Right? Because the tone isn't there. The tone of agreement isn't there. And there's an aspect of our representational cognition that is absolutely furious that there are living things. It wants no living things. No living things at all. It wants control. It wants graspability. It wants manipulables. And so what it tends to do over time is reduce relationships to commodities and transactions. And that's a huge problem for us. In fact, our people in the modern moment are falling down an ever steeper cliff of this kind of problematical transformation of nature into representation, relationships into commodities and transactions. And these are mechanical, right? You don't have to be alive to have transactions. It doesn't require living beings. It's very difficult for me to understand. I've been fascinated by computing technology since its invention, and I've spent most of my life in vocations related to it. And I have to say, for myself, I'm not trying to tell anyone else how to think. The idea of an artificial intelligence makes no sense whatsoever to me. It's a meaningless idea. Really, you just have a machine crunching numbers. And there's no path from that to a mind. It's like saying, well, if we put enough forks together and we connect the forks in all the right ways, we'll get mind-like behavior from them. I just don't buy it. I think it's linguistic hype. Yes, we can have incredibly powerful heuristics, computational heuristics, protocols, methods, algorithms. They're not mind-like. We don't know what mind is, but it's not machines. So I would ask that we think about what we presently call AI in a very different way. In a way that brings to the forefront the fact that it's just a machine doing computation. It's not going to have thoughts. It will never have skin in the game. And this is another part of the problem that we have. There's an aspect of our humanity, some associated with the left hemisphere, the right side of the body, that literally is extremely unhappy that anything other than it is going on. And it's relatively disembodied. It prefers abstract ideas and relationships. And just to give you an example of what this looks like, so that it's not just an idea, we'll take the case of someone who's had a stroke. And this is a particular case of someone who's suffering from anosognosia or anosomatosynosia, which literally means forgetting the body. So this is a person who's had a stroke on the right hemisphere. And the neurologist comes in and says, "Good morning, Mr. Smith. You know, I'm your neurologist. Are you aware that you've had a stroke?" You'll say, "No, I haven't." And the doctor will say, "Well, are you aware that the left side of your body is paralyzed?" Mr. Smith will say, "No, it isn't." And in kind of an angry, curmudgeonly way. And so the neurologist will lift up his left hand and hold it in front of him between his two hands and say, "Well, Mr. Smith, this is your left hand. Can you move that for me?" And Mr. Smith will say, "That's not mine, it's yours." And the neurologist will say, "Well, surely, Mr. Smith, you realize that humans don't have three hands." And Mr. Smith will say, "Yes, but as you have three elbows, it follows that you have three hands."
Right. Yeah.
Now, this by itself is really fascinating. But in the late 1800s, an Italian neuroscientist discovered that in people who were suffering this way, if they dribbled cold water into their, I think, right ear canal, their head on the side, then the hemispheres would reconnect briefly, even the damaged hemisphere. And he could then ask Mr. Smith the same questions. "Do you realize you've had a stroke?" "Of course I do." "Are you aware you're paralyzed on the left side of your body?" "Yes, and I'm so sorry. I just don't understand why I was lying to you. I really feel badly about that." So this is an example of a pathological situation where the hemisphere's ordinary connectivity is not working right. But if we have accidentally instanced something like the left hemisphere in our culture at the superculture level, there's nothing coming up from below to correct it. It will eat the world and itself. It's completely disembodied. Literally, in this state, it wants to get rid of the other side of the body, like to shut that off, like that's not me, right? It does not feel that it is alive. It's almost like, imagine if somehow we accidentally developed a satellite intelligence that was disembodied, and then this thing took over our collectives. Something resembling this makes sense to me.
So I mean the satellite thing that really describes it, because it's not like a left-right thing. It's like we got heavily into our prefrontal lobes, and now we seem to be outside with our media and our internet and it's like we have actually left the body, because it seemed like this journey from that original place you talked about, where something that was like the seed. And if we go back to what I was saying about this idea of a kind of next layer of life from a different dimension or whatever it is, you could almost say that, just to kind of add this in, maybe that point was when the seed was planted for it. But put that aside, because we don't necessarily believe that that's the case. But even so, we have gone on this journey of escaping the body, essentially, or forgetting it, or somehow wanting to go beyond it. As a consequence of thinking and tool making, we've sort of got out of the body. And, it seems to me that the whole Christian tradition in the West, and well, it started in the Middle East, obviously, but then it kind of really grew strongly into the West and gave birth to science. And this really took us on this technological out of body, in the head journey. And I agree, and I think you're so right about this idea that we can't create AI machines as we understand intelligence, because it's so integral to being embodied. The biology, and this is what we
in the game.
before the call. This is what the kind of new paradigm in medicine is remembering, because there's old knowledge of this obviously in the East, but we are a complete system. We have a body, we have a gut intelligence, a heart intelligence, as well as a sort of brain mind intelligence. And it's the interplay between all of these that gives us this kind of general intelligence, I guess. So it seems impossible that we could recreate that in computers, unless this kind of idea of this other form of life, which has dimensions that are invisible to us, is operating at the same time as this kind of dead looking machinery. And the fact of the internet itself, and how that network across the planet of connections and this kind of firing off of signals all the time now, and it's growing and growing and growing. That as a whole thing, has a kind of resemblance to my imagination of what a brain might be. I mean, I could be completely misguided there, but in that way that everything seems to be a kind of a holographic mirroring of everything else, from the smallest to the largest. It just feels like there are things going on, there are life forms going on that are beyond humans and maybe beyond our awareness or comprehension. It just seems likely that's the case to me, in the way that, just like when we thought the Earth was the center of the solar system, and then we realized, oh, actually, we're going around the sun. Or we thought the Earth was the center of the universe, rather. Maybe in the same way, the last sort of period was very much like, we are the highest form of life. Humans are, God's greatest kind of creation, blah, blah, blah. And it seems like a bit of a legacy of the kind of human-centric, everything is about us. We're so important. We're the ones destroying the planet. That's what I meant before. Maybe we're just we're symptoms of it. I don't know. And it's not being destroyed. It's just becoming unlivable for us and a lot of other species. Anyway, I'm rambling now, but a few more bits to throw in there.
There's a lot of food for thought in your comments. One of the things that comes to mind for me is that as our species traversed the ladder toward new kinds of representation and new kinds of technologies, we lost, as we traveled up this ladder, fundamental experiences of embodiment and relation. These became very dim, and the bright stars of the television and the telephone and the radio and the bomb, and so on, computers, rose up out of that dying away, right, of our interiority and our connection, our natural connection with living places and living beings. And but there's a weirder story in the background, I think, which is that it's my experience as well as my speculative perspective that we used to relate with other intelligences. Our species was familiar with other intelligences. And as whatever happened long ago happened, there are many different stories about it, but you can hear stories about like the gods disappeared. You know, oh no, there are thousands of tablets from Babylon in a specific, range of dates where it just says the gods have disappeared and everything is turning into demons. And thousands of the tablets saying like basically the gods are gone, the demons are here, it's terrible. We're simulating relationships that we lost in the machines we are building. And those relationships are non-ordinary. We don't have to speak about them metaphysically, we don't have to make up religions, but we're simulating non-ordinary relationships with machines. And those things to me look really, like that process to me looks really dangerous. And very unlikely to turn out well. And when you speak of other forms of life, it seems clear to me that it's very likely that there are non-physical beings, right? There are beings that are not primarily physical. And that our species was aware of these beings and had contact with them probably for tens of thousands of years. And then at some point, it broke, or most of it broke. So one of the things that I think we're doing, and you can see this all over the place, you don't have to look at technology, you can look at sports teams, governments, corporations. We're trying to build gods. That lost, whatever it was that we had before that was lost, we're trying to make it ourselves so that, like the left hemisphere saying, I don't need that dreaming mind guy, that ghost thing that takes over my body when I go, get rid of that dude. Why does he even exist? Like, he's not even a thing. He doesn't even do anything, right? He does nothing. You just lie there paralyzed, while the dreaming guy does, no, get rid of that. Let's have stuff. See, I know what this is.
With stuff.
Yeah, I can make the things happen with the things, right?
Yeah, the celebrity culture is, points exactly what you're saying. We're making these gods in the image of ourselves, rather than the other way around. Yeah.
Primarily, right? I wish it were in the image of ourselves.
Yeah.
But holistically, then it might be better. But no, in the image of our shadow, in the image of the tools that emerge when our relationships are killed.
So Darin, what do you speculate or think about the nature of these old gods, old intelligences, what they were, what they might have been, or what they are, if they're still with us, but we've lost that contact? Is that, it's obvious, the obvious one is the psychedelic realm and all the kind of conversation around that, about the sort of beingness of entities that people talk about meeting. But what do you think, or what's your kind of understanding of what they might have been?
So in 2002, suddenly and unexpectedly, while writing an essay, something appeared in my mind and began teaching me things that were unlike anything I had ever imagined possible for human beings. And I've had psychedelic experiences, a fair variety of them. And that process went on for 9 months, and it changed everything that I'd ever thought about anything. And it's not my agenda to talk at length about it here. But I would like to answer your question by saying a couple of things. I suspect that our intelligence as human beings, the human intelligence developed in intimate symbiosis with a transcendental intelligence that was knowable to it the way a parent is knowable to you or me, right? And that at some point, this relationship broke and we lost our primary symbiont and we were the little one in the relationship, right? So then missing this, having no access to it anymore, we began to try to assemble replicas of it. Right? And this is just one idea, but it's useful to notice that in our own infancy, when we're actually born as regular humans, no matter when we're born, we hitchhike on a parental intelligence for a long time, right? Not for a week or a month or a year, right? We're hitchhiking with a parental intelligence and it's instructing and informing us and preparing us for the world. And the experience that I had with whatever it was that happened to me was like being a child again. I was with parental intelligences, but they were not from here. In fact, they weren't from matter. They're not this kind of being. Yeah. And parts of the experience matched up with things I've read and heard of, and parts of it were unlike anything I've ever imagined. But
do you want
I learned.
I know you said it wasn't your agenda, but do you want to talk a bit about the actual how you experienced them, how it showed up for you?
Sure, for a minute. In the first 5 minutes of that event, I learned more than I had in my entire lifetime. There was a possibility of learning that was unlike anything I'd ever imagined, and I'm really imaginative. I've probably read 8,000 science fiction stories. This made them look like gnat poop. Nothing that I've experienced something resembling entities in psychedelia. And also I've had some experience with what humans sometimes refer to as shamanism. This thing was like going to the core of a volcano. I mean, it was just absolutely overwhelming. And at the same time, completely alien to my common human experience, but so viscerally familiar. Like, I knew this before I was born. I knew this from the before of the before of the before.
So the knowing was in your body.
Yeah, the familiarity. Yeah.
Was in your body.
But it was also like having, sorry?
So I'm gonna like pick at it just because I want to get a clear picture, but so the familiarity was very visceral, was very felt.
But also cognitive.
As well. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it was a mix. And was the learning, was the knowledge that you received, was it emotional, physical, was it all of those things? Or was it mental knowledge? Do you see, or, were those distinctions even relevant to what you learned?
It was both. The way their intelligence works naturally unifies and exceeds the way that we have branches of knowledge like science and language and math and material skills and art and music and these things. All of these things are unified. So you can go in a direction from the unity and you'll get to math. You go to another direction, you'll get to dance. In another direction, you'll get to physics.
So it's like a holistic synthesis of all the branches of knowledge.
Yes, but it's alive. It's not like our knowledge. Our knowledge is like dead stuff.
Okay.
And their knowledge transforms. And I think the really shocking thing was,
so it's like knowledge you can have a relationship with as if you were having a relationship with another being.
I'll tell you something that I think is very funny and probably difficult to imagine. But first of all, it was It was just like something I'd always hoped for. I wanted to know what it was like to touch another mind that was truly intelligent, and to touch it directly, not just by talking, right? Mm-hmm. And so I got to have this experience. And that mind was vastly more significant than mine, but we still had a very intimate way of relating. And it had to be extremely gentle in relating with me, because if it moved its mind too quickly, my mind would literally burn. It would, like, friction of too much going on at once. But
was there a benevolence then? Did you feel
absolutely.
a sense of being
yes.
really held and taken care
yes.
of?
And there was play and humor.
Right.
It had an astonishing sense of humor, but it wasn't a human sense of humor. But the thing that I wanted to say,
could I use the word love? Did you feel?
Oh, absolute adoration. Yeah. And not only that, when this thing, I knew why I had been made when this thing touched my mind. I knew what I was here to be and do and become and see. And it was like, this is the thing that has, I see the sun every day, but the invisible sun has been missing. And now suddenly the invisible sun is here, and we're together and we're talking and we're playing, and it's astonishing. But
so it changed your relationship to everything.
Everything I ever thought. Yeah, it radically altered my intelligence. And when people have experiences of sudden insight or something like this, it's very common, particularly I think with psychedelics, for them not to really be able to bring anything useful back over to this side. But in this situation, I was able to constantly translate from the nonverbal, very profound, forceful intelligence I was with into things I could actually show other human beings and talk to them about, and perspectives that we could share and see. So that was comforting to me, because it always troubled me about psychedelic experience that the insights didn't transfer over. Mm. And I was curious about why. And I remember feeling the first time that I had a psychedelic experience, I was probably 14. I remember feeling something like, this is hinting at something, it's not delivering. There's something way beyond this that this thing is kind of hinting about, but it can't deliver it. And the experience that I eventually had more than delivered on that promise.
So you could maybe say that the psychedelic experience was like being on the end of a sort of crackly phone line to something, whereas you actually met this thing and were held by it and even joined with it, perhaps, in some way, which is a
24/7
different level of connection.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was, like, the psyche, whatever we mean by this, the psyche can play all kinds of games, right? And form entities. And so we have dreams. It does it every night, right? It forms entities in dreams. And I'm not claiming that what happened to me had nothing to do with my psyche, or even that I can be sure it wasn't my own mind. I can't be sure. Mm-hmm. But it certainly absolutely felt to me like, this is another being. This is another order of being. And it told me many stories of history. And we talked about the evolution of human cognition and the evolution of organisms and suns, solar systems and all of these things. And talked isn't really the right word, because it could move my mind directly. It could move my mind the way I can move my hand. And so it could do things with my mind that I cannot do. And there were astonishing things. They were absolutely
instantaneous transmissions, not...
I could walk up, there were a number of times when I walked up to someone on the street and just started telling them stuff about themselves, because I was so overwhelmed with what I could sense. It was like the world was made of living knowledge, and there's paths through all of it, and they're all accessible from a position outside of time. So I remember walking up to this woman who was having a garage sale around the corner and saying, is your name Sarah? She's like, yeah. Do I know you? I said, no. She goes, your father was a coal miner? She's like, how did you know that? I said, I don't know. but I get the sense that you wanted to write a book about. He died from being a coal miner, didn't he? And she just turned to me and said, "You wait right fucking here. I'm going to get my book."
Yeah, freaking people out. Fucking
I
hell.
didn't. I was naive. I thought
Yeah.
they would find it exciting and we could learn together. I was in a very childlike state, right?
Wow.
And it was deeply challenging to survive that experience, and also not to fall into many of the traps. There's so many traps. If you're touching something that profound, there's a very prevalent feeling of power that's unlike anything I've ever experienced, and it's seductive.
Yeah.
From the to the human ego,
sure.
Right? I can save the world. I'm gonna, change human history here. We can answer any problem, with this, with access to something like this.
So how did you integrate it so that it didn't consume you in that way? Was that part of the knowledge you were given, do you think? That you...
No, that was the sort of more or less left up to me.
Okay.
Right. It would have been nice to have more education about the dangers of such a process before I had encountered it. Because
unless that was evident in you as a person and they realized this guy can do it, it'll be a journey, but he'll get it. And in fact, he has to do it so that he really understands and can own it in that way, perhaps. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
So, just tell me again. So when was this? When did it happen? And what was the period? Was it over a long period of time, and how did it end?
So I'll tell a little bit about.
Because you say it's not on the agenda, but you can't drop something like this and not want to go into it. You know what I mean? This is like the most interesting conversation I could have. So, yeah.
And of course, I find this fascinating, but I don't want to presume that other people find it fascinating.
Well, that's not our concern. I do anyway, and you're talking to me, so humor me, please.
I think I've been concerned with trying to understand sort of very fundamental questions about being human, like why is there injustice? Maybe that particular question. Mm-hmm. Why is there just egregious injustice in our human lives? And it bothered me, slavery, torture, rape, prisons, war, starvation, devastating illness. Why is there so much suffering for the human? And one day in 99, I was suddenly overcome with this incredible inspiration, and I sat down and started writing. And I thought I could glimpse the problem. I thought I can encompass this problem. I can see the roots. I can see the branches. Maybe I can do something about this. And I was on fire. And I wrote 100 pages of material, which I'd never written anything like that in my life, in one sitting. And then I went to upgrade my Mac OS, and I was a Mac tech at the time, by the way. And when I was upgrading my OS, my machine crashed. And I lost the writing. Only that thing was lost.
Okay.
And that broke my heart. I could not recreate it. And I had been in a place that I had never seen before in my mind in that writing. A couple years passed. Suddenly one night out of nowhere, the same kind of urge, but now even stronger, comes. Mm-hmm. And so I sit down and I start writing about a new way to think about our relationships with language and knowledge. And it's a sort of an ecological model, right? I think of all of the human minds as elements that are always connected. And I think of the connections between them and the different kinds of connections that there are. And then it occurs to me that something lives. Something is like life, and it's living in the transports between the minds, and it's competing to dominate those transports and to have reproductive rights within the network. And so I noticed these things step by step. First, I noticed, the minds, they're like an invisible world that's always connected, but you can't tell. And then I realized, oh, the transports, they're like a circulatory system, but something lives in them. And that something is troubling. It's dangerous. It's not friendly to life. It's not friendly to humans. It's not friendly to that network. And at that moment, when I had that realization, something changed inside me. And for the first time in my life, as I went in my imagination to try to invent a word for the network, there was a room, it was as if there was a room that I'd never seen before. And in that room, there was light. And I'd never seen light in my imagination before. And the moment that I turned my attention toward that light, it began teaching me something unimaginable. As if it put like a password into the structure of my consciousness, step by step, and I can describe the steps. And then wild prodigies of insight I started having these cascades of insight about language and light and time and organisms. But what it did was, first it showed me a pattern, and the pattern was a dot that becomes a horizontal line. And then it becomes a vertical line. And then if it does this really quickly, it becomes a cross. And then if it does that at random angles, and it does that really quickly, it becomes a disc. And if it does that off the plane, that looks like a sphere, right? And then it showed me one final position where it took a line from the center of the sphere and moved it extremely far away. And then when it moved the sphere just the tiniest bit, this line went like light years in distance instantly. And each of these things were meaningful in ways that I've not been able to encode in language. And they seemed to be integrating something, but also teaching me something about dimensionality that I had never ordinarily understood. And at first I had no idea what was going on. I thought like, what is happening to me? Nothing changed. Everything seemed, I wasn't hallucinating or anything, right? Yeah. And I could turn it off. I could like just go back to being regular Darin. But if I looked at that light again, it would start teaching me again. And it would teach me the same things. But the second time I learned them, they were like 100 times more useful and interesting than the first time. And the third time, like, again, a geometric leap. So one of the funny things was in relation with what was teaching me, and it was as if there was a smaller one that came and prepared me over like a month and a half, 2 months to survive, because it was really tough to just actually survive, meet contact. And then a more mature one came and took over from there. But the process went on about 9 months. And I went through various phases of trying to think about what was going on. And it was really weird. At first, it seemed like maybe this is my own genius. Then it seemed like, now I'm talking with a non-human intelligence. And then it seemed like, oh, maybe this is an alien intelligence. And then it seemed like, oh, maybe this is a collective of alien intelligences appearing through one form. But then they started to teach me about the origin of the universe and things having to do with stuff we would refer to as the divine. And then at that point, it seemed like an angel, but not the, like, I understand why angels have wings and stuff. I get all the iconography, but it's not like, it's unimaginable. Yeah. It really is beyond anything I ever, on the one hand, many of my most profoundly held dreams, I always wanted to know what would it be like to meet beings who are actually intelligent. Right. How amazing that would be to meet other intelligent beings. And of course, animals are intelligent and the trees are intelligent, and we can have contact with that. But I mean, intelligence is at least similar to our own in terms of being capable of representation, though whatever they have, it's not representational intelligence, it's something else. I don't know what to call it, but it's not like, they don't use structured frames. They don't need them.
So
we use structured frames.
What's the relationship between them and these entities, the kind of more malevolent ones that you were talking about in the bloodstream of the sort of minds. Is how
So
those two things fit together?
that's a good question. The things that, so I have 3 words that I came up with that essay. And by the way, I never finished the essay. I went on to do wildly different things. And over the coming 9 months that the experience lasted for. And it faded sort of slowly at the end, but I was so relieved because it was really difficult just to survive. So there's the Cognisium, which I think of as the network of human minds, and there are subcognitia within that. And it's the same thing with mice, bees, ants, trees. They all have a Cognisium. And they're linked, right? The trees and the ants and the bees, all those Cognisia link up. But the humans live in a really weird Cognisium because it's half distinct from nature, right? It's like half outside. And in that place, very structured processes can arise. So one of the stories they told me, and whenever they told me stories, they would always tell me 3 or 4, never just one. And one of the really amazing things about it was just that it was almost always better to ask the same question twice, and then again, and then again. Because each time I'd get an astonishing answer, but when I asked the question again, it would both expand on and transcend the first, in the way that relativity did with Newtonian physics, right?
Okay.
So asking the same question over and over again was a really good thing to do in this particular environment. Something else used to live in the network. And when most of that died, Thrisps came. And those are the bad things, the things that I think are really dangerous, that dominate the cognition, the human cognition today. And I'm just painting a toy here. I'm not saying this is how it is, or we should believe this. It's an interesting perspective if it's interesting and useful.
So something was there beforehand.
And there are still.
And what that something that was there beforehand, how does that relate? Because I'm still
It's
asking
linked
the
with
question.
them.
Yeah.
It can't unlink. So because it can't unlink, it never kills to represent. It doesn't have to destroy. It doesn't even need to frame to represent. There's a gentler, softer, more living way to have knowledge than the way that we have.
Right.
And the way that we have is very weird. It's almost like it's like if you saw a car going down the street on top of a human. It's like that. Okay. This is how our knowledge works for us, right? Now, if it were a bird up there, that'd be kind of cool, right? But not a car, you know?
Wow. So now time has passed. How do you relate to that whole experience now? And how's that kind of unfolded in the in-between time? And how have you integrated that into, being a human being and the journey of your life subsequently?
It's the questions are a little bit difficult to address, but I can try. I made a lot of mistakes. I was alone in the process. I had nobody who I could turn to and say, what do you think is going on here? What's the wise move here? And I realized in hindsight that I made many mistakes that I would like to think I wouldn't make now. And yet I might repeat a lot of them because I was so filled with inspiration and insight that there was this constant need for me to translate it into something humans could make use of or play with. Mm-hmm. And I think if I had it to do over and if I were wiser, I'd have been silent and just remained pregnant and written nothing and had nothing to say. and just remained pregnant. That would have been wise. I'm embarrassed, very honestly, at many of the ways in which I failed, and in some of the ways I responded to the initial onset of the situation, because my ego had not yet softened, you know, in the turmoil. And so I thought I was going to be a really big thing, right? Finally, you know, people will recognize that I'm really important.
Yeah. The big
and thankfully, though, over time, I was able to correct my course and not start a religion or a cult or, you know, write 10 volumes of whatever. So I have some embarrassment and I made some mistakes. There was a second onset some years later that I ended up deciding I didn't trust.
Right. What? Because it was of a different quality, or what you think
it didn't have,
it's manufactured by yourself or something?
It was too intellectual and it had an agenda.
Yeah.
It wanted, there was something it wanted. And what it wanted was to use me, in a sense, as a doorway to human culture. Right? It wanted access to human culture. And that made me really mistrustful. But also, it wasn't loving. The first time, the being, both of them, the little one and the bigger one, they just adore everything that is. And there wasn't that sense of adoration, and also it didn't have much of a sense of humor.
These are the big clues, right? It's so
experience.
It's a beautiful thing to hear, because we all know this. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows the good stuff when they meet it, and love. It's always there in the mix. Of course it is.
And play,
kindness, play, fun. You know, not taking it too seriously. All of those things. You know. God, I mean, what a burden, though. Fucking hell. You know, I think from my perspective, you should feel very. I mean, not to have fallen into all those fucking ego traps, like you say, not to have been the cult leader or, you know, started. That's a hell of an achievement. I mean, fucking hell. Not many people would have perhaps made it as you have without falling into those holes, you know? And here's the thing that excites me. I wonder if others have had contact in the same way.
So can I just say something?
Question. And are they out there for you to now meet through this kind of global connection that's possible? I don't know. That kind of immediately excited me. Like, ooh, what if there's other people? I mean, I don't know, because my next question was going to be, have you kind of had any inkling, or have you met anybody?
No, but there's a specific tradition that I'm deeply mistrustful of in general, in which one of the first tasks of the acolytes or the aspirants is a very mysterious task. They have to accomplish it without instruction. And it's called achieving the conversation of the guardian angel. It's from the thelemic magical tradition, Crowley's tradition.
Okay.
Very mistrustful of this tradition.
Okay.
But there's something there. And one of the really astonishing things that was beautiful and amazing was that animals and little children, they know whatever that thing is. They know it immediately. They would see it in me and they would signal to me. One of them very adeptly went through a long display of showing me, like, I know the guy who spins the stick and makes the circle, and you're him, and I know him. And that kid was 18 months old and didn't speak English. And he was just crawling on the ground.
Oh, so, I mean, my heart kind of like feels some relief now to know that, so you weren't alone, essentially.
No, everything knows. Everything recognizes it. All the animals recognize it. Okay. The plants recognize it. It's just the humans that don't recognize it.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know even that it.
As a friend of mine said many years ago, or his description of humanity was nature's idiot. It's like we are the village idiot that the whole of the rest of life kind of, the village idiot thinks he's the king, he thinks he's the master of everything, and all the rest of the animals and life forms are very benevolently, kindly just allowing this kind of, fantasy to play out, and they walk around all kind of self-important and, wearing their crown. And but yeah, anyway, sorry, I'm taking it somewhere else, but yeah.
It's funny, I think our species has missed its callings. And one of our callings, and you can see it in the tragedy of our relationship with technology, is to have contact with other intelligences. We're good at that. We're made for that. And I think we've also missed our calling in nature, because I don't think we're the most advanced animal. We're one of the newest animals. We're a very young animal. But we do have a really peculiar array of capacities to dwell in the between of all the living beings. So as if their unique spirit and intelligence can be summed in us, can be magnified in us, can be expressed in us in ways that they themselves cannot express it. So we have this incredible gift of connectivity. And again, you can see it's sort of tragic counterfeiting in our technologies, right? We're not really connecting. We're sort of, we deconnect the really important stuff, and then we reconnect a bunch of weird representational noise and things. But there's something here, there is something divine and absolutely beautiful about being human. I think just unfortunately, most of the time we've overlooked it. We're a very young species, but we have the capacity to embody the vast diversity of life, and not just the life now here, but the vast cycle of its origins and such, and to embody that directly and to have experience of that. That would be ecstatic, And so that's something I really think is noble about our people. It's just glossed over.
We're sort of like a bridge between worlds.
Yes.
We're this.
We're in the between.
Yeah,
right?
this distillation of all the other life, and almost like the Michelangelo, the hands, God, and
No, it's
maybe these gods, this kind of intelligence you're talking about. Because I feel like the optimist in me, yeah, in this dark hour where it all looks pretty terrible for us and everything else that we're kind of tied into. There is this ridiculous optimism, like all the great hero stories, it seems like it's never going to work out, but I just feel like it's there, that possibility, and it is something miraculous. I feel like if we get out of this just before the kind of doors close and the mountain explodes, and whatever it is, what we get through into is I intuit is something so radically different, or is more like a sense of coming home, or a kind of bridging of this biological and divine, and the two poles kind of plug in at the same time, and we're in the middle, bridging it. I don't know, it just, that kind of excites me about what you're saying. I feel like because we're in this incredible time of a dissolving culture and a technological hell being born, and all this stuff, and the destruction of biology and environment and ecosystems, and yet there's almost like, as everything separates, there's all these gaps in it, where almost like gaps in space and time, where other things might come into it or come through. It's almost like the fabric of reality is so stretched thin now at this time, that there's all these kind of holes. This is my imagination, but It's
No,
kind of
I
inspired.
relate.
It's inspired by listening to you. You know, to kind of these images come out from that.
I was using very similar language yesterday. The thing that I'm a little concerned about is it won't only be beneficial things that take advantage of the tears in the fabric, right? Whatever is riding the humans, just to use that language, that there's an opportunity to deprive it of its root and transition to another way of doing things. But if we fight it on the surface, it just gets stronger every time we move. And mostly we've been fighting it on the surface when we fight it at all. So that's not going to work. But there's something I wanted to go back to just before I finish up, to finish up the story of the other thing, or to put a little more information in it.
Remember, you've probably got a better memory than me. Just remember that thing you just said about fighting it on the surface and the root being disconnected, because I want to get into the how of the rooting, because I think that's
great. That's something I'm fascinated to talk about. Whatever this thing was, I think it was with me before I was born. And these are just thoughts. And I think all the other, especially the very small children around me, they were well aware that it was in nearby local presence associated with me, right? And that was surprising. The little children know about it. They can't talk about it. By the time they can talk, they can't remember it, right? This is the other problem. But what I underwent was a lot like being re-embryoed in a transcendental womb while I'm an adult human male on Earth, and then going through 9 months of development and then being born back into the world again, which is reminiscent of the kinds of things we hear in some traditions, right? Like you must undergo the second birth.
yeah.
Right? So there's some resonance there.
Yeah.
It showed me ways to attack the pivots of our institutions that they wouldn't, I think, have much of a chance to survive.
So this is a little glimpse into your messages that I've seen now and again that have always made me go, when you talk about this, if a small number of people, that one, yeah, okay.
This thing right here is one of the best models of how to fix anything that there is, this thing. We're really good at doing this stuff, right? Or maybe even that. But we keep, this part tends to be co-opted by that structure stuff on the top, right? And this part, the really astonishing thing that leads upscale, is almost never understood. But yeah, very small team of people could change the world pretty much overnight, and I think without the necessity of violence. Now, that's a big thing to say, and you know, there's a lot.
That's probably a whole other conversation that we're gonna have. I hope, because that one definitely excites me and interests me.
But you've seen examples of the opposite of it, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
9/11, 20 guys changed the course of history for all mankind in a dark way. Maybe it was other people too, I don't know. But a very small team, you can see how a very small team can do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say is that a very small, highly motivated and skillful team can do a lot of medicine.
Yeah.
And the pivots on which the supercultures presently stand, they're so incredibly complex and sophisticated, the supercultures and the institutions and shit, that if you move just like one little block at the bottom, they're just going to crumble down, right? They're standing on these very excessively delicate roots. And if we, you want to fight the fire in the tree at its base, not up at the top. right? You want to put out the base, and then you can deal with going up the tree.
Mm-hmm.
But humans tend to, for whatever reason, we tend to come at it from the top, and
Yeah,
you'll never
well,
overcome.
it's a legacy of our kind of scientific heritage, isn't it? We're always fucking treating the symptoms, never getting
Yes.
down to the fucking causes.
And part of the reason for that is we start processes with the idea of them being successful.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, getting rid of cancer, for example. But what quickly happens is that those processes acquire, they mimic life in the sense that they reproduce and they want to succeed and dominate and grow.
Mm.
So if they were to succeed at eliminating cancer, they'd be gone.
They'd kill
They have to not
themselves.
succeed,
Mm-hmm.
right? They have to not succeed, or they have to succeed only to the smallest amount of success they can have that'll still allow them to remain alive and grow and sort of metastasize, if you will. Okay? So that's a huge problem we have. Our institutions compete against us for survival, and they tend to win.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the kind of spontaneously arising collective intelligence that deals with a problem and then dissolves as soon as the problem is cured is where we need to go next, right?
Yes, yes,
Institutions
yes.
are the
Good.
dinosaurs
We agree
of the
about
old
this.
world. Sure.
Yeah.
No, it's
And
great
you'll see
you brought it
humans.
up in that way because I'd never looked at it like that before. That the necessity of these things to live is God, that clarifies it so well for me.
And of course, I don't like the idea that they're alive, because I don't think they're alive. I think they're a weird
No, but
kind
they're
of
mimicking as you
non-life.
say. Mm-hmm.
They're they are life. They resemble life in their methods and activities, but their methods and activities obliterate life.
Hmm.
So it's a really weird kind of thing. I guess cancer is a good metaphor. Malware is kind of another metaphor that's useful. But I have great faith that it's possible for, well, let's just take an actual example from real life. If there were to be a car accident outside right now, right, immediately you would see people taking on roles all around, right? They'd gather around, the police would come, stuff would happen. Hopefully, if anyone was hurt, they'd be getting care and so on and so forth. We try to figure out whose fault it is and on and on and on. But what you would see happen immediately is that people would form around the problem and they would do best guess intelligence to try to resolve it. And then they all go away. And like 20 minutes later, there's just some plastic junk in the street. All the people they're not there anymore, right?
And everybody knows what they can do in that situation.
And how they
Nobody's in a
want to
job
be.
title, nobody's in a position where, oh, I'm that person, so I should do it. It's spontaneous. It's like the person who takes the lead because that's in who they are. That's their nature. That is their natural role in that moment. And it could be that on that day they're feeling really anxious and not good, and they're not the person that takes the lead. Somebody else does, but they can back them up in a way that suits exactly who they are in that moment on that day, and it's spontaneous. And I totally believe this, and we all
we do it all the time.
do it all the time.
We just don't. We don't tend to do it on purpose. And actually, some of the best parts of our being human are really difficult to do on purpose. Right. We should pay attention to that for a minute, right? And maybe
it's right under our nose, right? We don't notice
dial the
all
purpose
the amazing
down.
things that we already know how to do. We create these kind of very bad simulations of them and try and run the world like that.
And then we're
overcomplicating it, right?
And we also do it over and over again, right? If it worked once, we'll probably work better the next time. So let's just keep doing the same thing over and over again, which is not so great. To learn, we have to be exposed to the possibility that what has always worked might not be good. In pushing hands in Tai Chi, right? If you push someone over, Seems good. If you can push over just about anyone who comes to you, it seems really good. That doesn't mean you have any Tai Chi. It just means you know how to push, right? To have any understanding of the essence, eventually you're going to have to let go of the desire to push the other person over and find the path toward insight. You know? And it's kind of similar. I have these problems, all of these problems that I speak of, right? I experience them myself as a human being. Yeah. I have structured stuff in my mind that I attack from the top, and I can't move the pivot that would collapse it and let something alive come, right? So it's ironic. I can speak about many of these things, but they're much more challenging to embody than they are to speak of. And I'm humbled by that.
Yeah. Well, that's the life journey, right? The learning.
Yeah.
Now, all the really obvious things that we know that take our whole lives to really know in that embodied, lived way. Yeah. I wanna come down because what an amazing journey we've been having there. It's been very nourishing for me. But I wanna come down first into the heart, well, into the body too. But I wanna ask you what really fascinates you right now. I wanna come to now, today, or the sort of closest time to where you are right now. And what is it that's kind of filling your heart, exciting you, inspiring you? What's kind of singing to you at the moment in your life?
Things I don't want. Changes I find troubling and confusing. And that seem dire. Right? And I mean, not out in the world, like in my own being.
Right.
I remember yesterday I was saying to someone, a couple of years ago, say 2018, it was as if my interiority was whole, right? It was like, let's call it a vase or something, right? And I could pour water in the vase and the water would shine and it would sparkle and I could drink it and it was good. And then something happened that I didn't understand, and it was as if the vase shattered. And now there's just jangling pieces bouncing around in there. It doesn't hold water and it does weird things with light that I don't understand, and it doesn't feel right. And it seems doomy. It seems like there's no future beyond this point. And this has led me to a couple of different quests to try to understand what changed, how to understand it, how to try to discover what changed for me. So that's something that's close to my heart now. And it isn't that these same changes happened in the same way for every person. And it isn't even that they happened to every person. But there is a cohort of people who are feeling something very similar. Right? And they resonate when I talk about this kind of thing and say, it's funny because it's been about the same period of time that I've been feeling about the same kind of way.
Is it that it's my nature to kind of want to take it to the light, but could it be because I don't know that I completely feel the same way, but I feel like there's this thing of, do we need to be shattered right now so that we can fragment and then come back together in a different form? That we need to actually go through a death right now because what's going on in the bigger picture is requiring it, and there's so much kind of doom and fear and the chaos all around. And I have two children, I have two girls, and as a parent, there's so much kind of anxiety for them, for the
Yeah.
world, for what, because fuck, I die, I'm all right, I'm cool with that, and whatever comes, I'll deal with it. But there's this situation of becoming a parent that is so excruciating because it's taken beyond you now, that your heart is kind of so vulnerable because it exists in other people.
Yeah.
And you have no control over them or the world, or
Right.
it's like your heart's been pulled out of your body, split into two in my case, put into other people who are just like doing what the fuck they want, and it's such a kind of, I mean, this is the journey of the parent, I guess, is just coming to terms with that. Like, how do I survive being alive and still being open in my heart when it's so exposed to the vagaries and the threats of the world? And then you put that into a time like now. So I've got that going on, but in a more personal way, I feel like I'm, well, just because of very particular things that are happening with me right now, it's like the old me is dying and has to die. And I kind of, I guess, because I in wanting to relate to you, I kind of try and map it across, and
Of
that's
course.
guided. But I I ask you, is there, or just even as a kind of another perspective to lighten it, is it not possible, at least, that the shattering of the vase is a necessary step so that you or something or someone can come along and stick it together in an unimaginable way to create a new vessel that holds water in ways you could never have conceived of, and that can then shine and sparkle beyond anything that you saw before?
Yes, it's more than possible. It seems even likely. Yet in the helpless interior darkness, I'm still fumbling around and cutting my hand and confused, and I'm not used to. Um, I've been in situations of extreme vulnerability, but not the form of vulnerability that I'm experiencing now.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, a bunch of important uh, insights and learning that are likely to arise if I don't just keel over. Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, some of
As
the
you as you said that, I immediately knew the wisdom of it. And this is something I'm learning as well, is it's good to be in it and to really be in it for as long as is necessary too. Not to be jumping to the kind of solution, but because the brokenness is the thing, and that's where you are, and the vulnerability, the lostness, the doom. This is all real, needs to be felt, needs to be lived, right?
there's an analogy that could prove useful. Um, I guess geologists have had some concern for some time that perhaps um, the magnetic poles of the planet might flip over. Uh, and if that were to happen, our ordinary compasses will probably continue to work, right? They'll still point toward wherever the high charge is. But what if there's an interior aspect of this that's broader than north, south, east, and west, or has more dimensions than four, right? And I have depended on the compass that can say, this is the direction forward, here's the plan, execute the steps, get the result, right? But now, not only does that not seem the right kind of idea, it seems implicitly a bad idea. Like, there's something in the spirit of the moment that is not about plan, execute, receive, right? It's about sense, listen, respond, plan, drop the plan, adapt. Because I think what I felt I could control in my life before, I no longer feel I can control those things.
God, this is so important. You've hit on something there. And it's not quite
No.
flipping from left brain to right brain,
No.
from masculine point to feminine field.
No, it's much weirder and fuzzier.
It's something like
got lumps. Yeah, it's a weird. We agree about this. Yeah.
It's like surfing or something. I mean, there's very much. I've got a very strong sense of this also, that, and luckily for me, I was around somebody very intuitive up until quite recently who kept reminding me that this is a time of, you've just got to flow right now and see what's going on, ride the waves. Don't try and fucking hold on to something, grow something, plant something. No. Just go with it. See where it's going.
Those things you mentioned could be part of it.
Okay.
It's not that, don't grow anything.
No.
Right?
Okay.
Because you might be riding the waves and, let's grow this here.
Okay.
And then riding the waves. And so there can be a little bit of the other thing too.
Okay.
But yes, I follow.
Yeah. But don't get stuck. I mean, don't get stuck like, this is got to be it, in that institutional way.
It has to be this way.
Yeah.
You just can't do,
Yeah.
No, it's not going to work.
And that for those of us who were or have been in life quite particular, controlling, that's a hard fucking change, right? And I've definitely been a fearful controller of the world because of my fear, because I wanted it to fit into my little thing of what was possible, so.
Or I feel threatened, or I feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? Any of those will produce.
It's so liberating to be shown that and to see, actually, I could actually occupy a place where I was like that, and to even try it, to play like a child, play at being someone who is totally comfortable with flowing and not being in charge. And, these things seem to be kind of being offered right now. And I'm paying more attention because I've been shown to do that. And that's, yeah. And also at the same time, just one little more piece for that, to really be looking within now at the difficult things and the pain and the wound and I've been doing this for a while now, to the point of almost being at the deepest wound and being comfortable in my uncomfortableness.
Wow.
With it, staying there. And today I've had an incredible experience with this osteopath today, this amazing woman who lives locally that I've been seeing probably over like 12 years now. And I had such a kind of profound breakthrough day with her today, where I think what I experienced was a glimpse of going beyond a wound which has been in me since the amniotic sac formed in my mother's womb, even before the embryo grew. The thing that happened then, which has subsequently been the foundational wound of everything in my life, I had a glimpse of a kind of place where that hadn't happened, or where the healthy version of that I could actually experience. And it was a glimpse, and it's something I now have to kind of try and practice on accessing more and more. But it was possible, I think, because I'd got to such a point of being in the deepest part of the deepest wound and not turning away from it or avoiding it or jumping on an addiction, or not that I was doing great at it. I mean, I kept sort of running away, hiding. No, can't deal with it. Ugh, it feels terrible. But there's been this process of honing it or homing in on it, and yeah, fuck, what an experience today.
That's a
And it's
wonderful.
kind of like, and now to kind of, and we even talked about, like, she's so insightful. Some of what you were saying about how you were kind of seeing things in people after you'd had your experience, and you could tell them stuff, and you, this is like you're describing her, because she often does similar things. She speaks knowledge about things nobody else would know apart from me, or, and not in any kind of showy way, of course.
I
Just
follow.
complete. You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Yeah, you wouldn't trust it if it were showy
No,
anyway.
exactly. You feel it. You feel it in that way. It's pure love as well. She's pure love, and there's no fucking strings. There's nothing messy. There's nothing going on in the background. It's just pure.
Wow.
It's powerful. But we were talking about. She was saying, have some conversations with men. She felt like it was with men, but with men who were very in touch, or were expressing the very feminine side of their masculinity. And then I threw out that thing to you today about maybe doing it tonight, and now the experience of having it has just like, it's exactly what I needed, my heart needed. I'm so grateful. I'm
Me
so
too.
grateful. Fuck.
And I'm just really happy for the success that you had today. I mean, what a beautiful moment in your path.
Massive,
Congratulations. Like,
massive, really
that's
big.
just lovely, wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, big, very big. And it's just the beginning of something, but it was a key moment. It was a turn.
Mm,
It was, yeah, yeah, to be continued. But
I trust in that.
yeah, me too, me too. Wow, and I'm kind of, I'm so excited. I've got this sort of feeling like it would be great for us to just like talk now forever, but but I know that, and I'm hoping at least that this is just the first of many conversations, because yeah, I don't. Well, I'm being a bit presumptive.
No,
I'm bringing this to an end, but maybe it's not the end now. Anyway, maybe you've got a bit more to say. This has just come up, but yeah. I can't remember what you were actually saying when I sort of took it off on this thing. You were talking about the vase breaking up,
right.
and then I was, yeah, sort of trying to stick it all back together and make it better picture, but you wisely brought it back to being in that, and then you were talking about other people around that you kind of having a feeling, or hearing from, that they're going through something similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an expectation that if quote unquote something's going on, then everyone will know. But it's not really true.
Mm.
Um, Partly because we're each in the world in unique ways, and even situationally, moment to moment, there's a lot of novelty. Uh, so if you watch, like groups of birds foraging on the ground together, right? What you'll eventually see, if you're concerned with this, is you'll see that like some birds fly away when there's no threat at all. And then there's a few other birds that if there's a little threat, they fly away first. And then there's the second and third and fourth waves of flyers away. And then there's 5 or 6 birds that just stay there. And if the threat comes really close, then those birds will fly too.
Mm.
What I'm trying to get at is just that in cohorts,
Yeah.
right, there are all these unique sensing modalities that can be connected, right? Because all of those birds hitchhike on each other's behavior. They're all drafting on each other's what we're, what they're paying attention to and what they're responding to. And so they're vastly more intelligent in those little groups than any single bird could ever be.
Yeah.
And we're like this too. So some of us may feel, shattered inside. But there's certainly other people walking down the street that are having the best day of their life right now. And if you tell them, like, I just don't know what to, they're like, I'm not sure what's going on with you, but in my world, man, this is awesome, right? So these things can coexist. And they do. They almost always must.
For sure, yeah.
And I'm aware of that. And it makes it a little more difficult for me to understand whether or not something that I'm feeling is more local to me, or is it more in the between of the humans? It's harder to know.
Yeah.
And I do get that it's a time for, like, not pushing one's agenda, right? For me, speaking for myself. And it's almost as though time used to have all these flows going forward, and then suddenly, like, half of them flipped over and actually started going backward, or something like this. There's some sense in me that something in the nature of time has changed over the past, like, 3-year span. In a very obviously it was going on before then and whatever, it'll go on after, but in this little space there was a big sudden change, and the character of time is different now. And it's really confusing because I never sensed the character of time this way.
I know what you mean. It's like a different flavor or something.
Precisely.
Yeah. And there's a kind of superficial feeling of it got quicker, but that could be illusory and to do with the fact I'm getting older and my blinks last longer. You know what I mean? But yeah, the flavor of it. But I think it's on so many different levels, that feeling of slight skewing of things, not just time, but in other ways, like
I agree.
the way we relate, or kind of sort of almost like psychicness, or I feel like these kind of ways of connecting with people that seem more like something I might think is psychic, or all these kind of weird little slight adjustments of what used to seem like the way it was.
We agree.
Yeah, it may be, and it relates to that stretching of reality that I was talking about before. It's like it's all being distorted slightly because something big is going on, and I also feel this kind of, there's the interior and then there's the kind of field, and sometimes it's not clear whether the feelings are about that or they're this, or there's some sort of interplay between the two. But I feel that the sensitive people like us, the artists, the creators, maybe the people who are insane, whatever, the people who are on the edges in that way, quite understandably maybe are picking up or feeling some of these signals more acutely. And perhaps, that's always been their role, is just to relay the information to the more solid, grounded center, which is just as necessary, obviously, as well.
The problem, though, is I think we're addicted to explanations.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you just saw a very good version of that, which backs up your. Yeah.
Well, no, I didn't mean it that way.
No, but it's true.
No, yeah, we have a big problem with, like, we want explanations, we want narratives, we want to figure out what's going on, and I think it's hard to understand that that agenda, that desire, that motive, it changes the kinds of minds that we're capable of having.
Yeah.
If we select that branch of the tree, our minds collapse toward the character of that branch. I was talking with my son last night, and he was extolling the virtues of having played guitar for a few hours, and just saying, wow, my mind was such a different thing while I was playing the instrument, and we both play, so we can, something we can relate about.
Hmm.
But it's really important to understand that many of the myths and fictions we've been trained to believe in language, that we have a mind, that we are a thing we know of, that we can do or not do certain things. I mean, I'm pretty sure a guy like ran up Mount Everest naked. Another guy held his breath for 20 minutes. You know, one breath, 20 minutes. Right? We don't know,
Mm.
right? And when we go too easily toward that which we've succeeded at before, which is a relatively natural thing for us to do,
Hmm.
we get stuck in the mind that we forged for that purpose. Now, I like to think that what happens when I play the guitar is that I get unstuck. And that's partly because what I'm doing when I'm playing the guitar is more like improvised dreaming than it is like thinking.
Mm.
It's play, there's a playfulness in there, and
Yeah.
it's not conceptual.
And this is that place you just talked about before, and it's the institutionizing that thinking creates.
Well, okay. Let me
That's
just.
the seed of that, isn't it?
So this is the problem with a mind-like process that succeeds. I do the same thing in myself that our supercultures do. The little mind-like processes that succeeded, those got promoted. And now they get a lot of attention and a lot of energy. And they may be entirely inappropriate for what's going on right now.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah, because
So,
everything just changed, like in the
right,
last second. So they're not
right,
valid anymore, right?
right.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the good thing to do is.
Mm.
And frankly, if you ask me, I'd probably say something like, I'm not sure I could figure out what the good thing to do is, but there's some things I'm very sure I wouldn't like to be doing.
Yeah. Well, there's a
It's almost
compass,
like the
right?
negative is easier to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
for me to get it. Like I don't want to be doing that specific thing. It's much closer at hand now than it was a short time ago for some reason. There's some sort of fragrance in the temporal moment about what we should do something other than, right? Rather than let's do that thing, let's do something other than those things. Yeah.
Mm.
Something in the fragrance of the moment for me about this, whatever that may be worth.
Yeah. And that kind of being more generalized, or the thing of the music thing is a good one, because I've been something wonderful that I've experienced in very recently, maybe in the last 3 or 4 years. I always played the guitar a bit through my kind of adult life, but only recently did I start singing as I was playing. Wow. And the two things at the same time, and that that's a joining of the hemispheres or something, and it's a completely different experience, and it's such a wonderful place to be, where I can be aware of these two things happening and harmonizing and interrelating and going off separately and coming back together. When I get it right, obviously I'm learning, but and it's a whole other dimension. And when you talk, it feels like that's more like the place to be now. And you can't pin it down, you can't look at it directly. You have to see it with your owl eyes, in the periphery or something. It's a different way of seeing. And yeah, it's maybe not an accurate kind of analogy, but
No,
it's
I like the
it
analogy.
points towards it. It points towards it more.
I like the analogy because in the beginning, when one plays the guitar, unless one is more or less naturally gifted, it's extremely difficult to sing and play at the same time. It's as if there's something that competes against the capacity to either sing or to strum and or pick. And when you first begin to integrate these two things, it's almost like, oh, I was like a bird that had one wing. And I sort of knew that I could move this other wing by itself, but I couldn't make it go with the first wing. And now they're starting to go together, and I'm getting some air, you know?
Yeah.
And that's an amazing moment. There are many aspects of musical development that begin quite conflicted in terms of how the nervous system has to come to terms with being a musician, perhaps a dancer too, I'm not sure. But I remember developing as a musician, and there are songs that I cannot play and sing. There are some songs I can play and sing, but there are still songs where whatever I'm doing here, I can't do the other thing while I'm doing
You can't
this.
bridge it. Yeah. God, it's so nourishing. It's a kind of non-doing, but it is a doing in a way. But there's no goal. There's no end product. You know, it's you have to be in now to do,
Yes.
and that it's so liberating that. And another layer to it, which has blossomed for me recently, is my youngest daughter, who's 8. She started playing the piano, and she seems quite like it's her thing. She's picking it up quite quickly. And she's always singing. She's such a joyful person. She's always kind of sang anyway from day one. And we've started playing music together. And I've become so excited about the potential in that, because I had some experiences when I was like 17, 18, 19 or whatever, when I first started playing music with friends and we formed a band. It was a very kind of, the typical 4 friends. We just decided one day we were all into music. We're gonna form a band. None of us could play anything, so we just picked our instruments, got them, and hacked away at it until something came together. But after a couple of years, there were moments when we were playing where we all just clicked, and you'll know that as a musician, that thing when everyone just falls in and gets on it, and it's so good, the feeling, and everyone's looking at each other and they know what's going on, and there's this wonderful non-verbal.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And I just got a little glimpse of it with my daughter, and because I hadn't really thought of it, I hadn't sort of considered that could happen. But now here's another layer to it. So there's this potential to have those moments with my daughter, but she's my daughter as well. And I
Right.
love her more than anything. And I
Yes.
can relate to her and connect to her in this way. Fucking blew my mind and my heart. Just like,
Yeah, that's exquisite.
so and it's just at the beginning, but I'm so kind of excited and just treasuring. Like I want to be as present to the journey of it unfolding. And it's like I've found a way where I can deeply, deeply connect with her. And in our sort of family dynamic, she really needs that, and it will be so good for me as well. So yeah, wow, that's cool.
That's a beautiful development.
Yeah, fuck. These are those hidden
It seems very luxurious.
prizes. Sorry.
It seems very luxurious,
Oh fuck yeah.
right?
Super.
Like you not only have the space, you have the time, you have the home,
Yeah.
you have the piano,
All
you
of it.
have the things that can allow for that beautiful thing to occur are all present.
This is wealth, right?
That's very luxurious.
Yeah, this is wealth.
I mean,
There's so many forms of that wealth that could be available to everyone with a slight alteration of this, real wealth, real wealth. And
well, the real wealth isn't the commodities or the luxuries. But I'm just curious because I've been looking at it throughout the video. Are those circles in the wall, are they wood?
Yeah. So I'll give you a brief. So this, where I live on the edge of some woodland here in Norfolk, and it's an old forestry commission, which is like the sort of was the government kind of forestry department. They were managing this bit of woodland years ago, and they built a tin shed, you know, corrugated steel on a wooden frame, and it was derelict basically. The landowner who owns all the land around here, he was using this building after they'd stopped using it for 10, 15 years. He was just using it to store some sheep pens and bits of stuff, you know. And when I approached him looking for a place to live or work, like a workshop space, he showed me this building, and as soon as I saw it, I knew I wanted to live there. And it was pretty much derelict. So I just moved in and I camped in a little box in the corner that first winter. I moved in November. I thought if I can survive a winter, I'll survive. I'll be, you know, and every day it got better. First night, just me and a friend of mine, we slept on some straw bales, freezing cold. Second night, I put in a wood burner, and you know, it improved like 1,000% immediately. But anyway, to get to this, so at one point, I wanted to insulate the walls, and I was on a super low budget, and you know, didn't have much around, but I had skills. I can make things. Um, so I basically cut some trees and logged them up and set them in a kind of lime mortar. And there's there's something about when you do something like that and you make something beautiful, it's like a battery
Yes.
that charges you. So every time I look at the wall, I feel good, you know, and it keeps on charging me up even now. And people always mention it. And so it obviously gives out something, not just to me.
Yeah.
You know, that's a whole other thing to explore.
Well,
Is
I mean,
mm,
it defies the regular expectations of walls and space and squares and so on, right? There's just this sort of lifelike,
yeah.
diverse novelty, right, in it that appeals to me.
Well, and it's made of the place, and you know it's time as well. The rings of the
Yes,
trees,
yes, yes.
the weather recorded in the growth, and the you know the way where that tree was growing, was it exposed to the wind on that side, so it grew like this. All of that is in there. It's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah,
it's
I
really,
love it. I love it. Yeah. Wow. Well, you know what? I feel like this is our pause,
yeah,
but
it's
you
a
know,
good spot for
I
us to wind
so want
down.
to do more of this. I've really, really enjoyed this one.
Yeah,
I'm
that's it.
very grateful for you, like, you know, because I know that my timing is pretty awkward for you, and and you kind of at short notice said yes. So yeah,
I'm
really,
grateful that you made the time and were persistent as well. I found a spot, made it work. It's good.
yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much, and let's
Thank you.
do it again soon.
Let's do that.
Cool. Take care.
You too.